What's up, girl? I see you. All right, everyone. Welcome. My name is Anthony Kelly. Today, I wanted to kind of start a conversation on race, identity, conflict, the human experience. As you just look at the news and you kind of think about like what's kind of going on in the community, you kind of see these trends that continue to kind of perpetuate themselves. Emotional discontent, gender issues, race, and now with the presidency and just the huge change, kind of awakening spiritually. There's a lot of things that are coming up emotionally that people I'm seeing are having a very hard time in learning how to manage. And so this talk today, when I'm thinking about race, identity, and conflict, the human experience, is really more so sharing kind of my own struggle and what tools I developed to help me manage the inherent conflict and acknowledging kind of your own issues within race, your identity, and the inherent conflicts with kind of just existing. And then thinking about kind of the practices, where I'm at now with my practices and how I'm doing things. And so right now, that's kind of where I'm gonna have the focus of this talk. Feel free to ask questions around your own ideas, but really I just feel like it's important, especially with the friends and the work that I've done in the institution, around the world, with the community building. I think it's very important that we try to model to each other how we struggle with emotional discontent, brass tacks. And so for me, with having this platform, with having a chance to do a documentary, travel the world, and really investigate the spaces that I occupied, the spaces that I did right and wrong in, and as I faced those trials and tribulations, that could be very fatiguing. So when I talk about the notion of yoga breathing, eating, diet habits, the energy that you keep around yourself, mind manifestation, that's literally kind of the tools that have helped me develop and manage the chaos of constantly keeping myself accountable. And so it's hard. And so today with this conversation, we think about race, identity, conflict. It's really going to be thinking about kind of these principles and why we struggle around it and what the practice is. And so just to kind of start off with what I like to think about is just kind of our historical disposition, United States. And for me, I was born here. I was born in Pasadena. I grew up in the streets of Los Angeles, happened to get a scholarship to play football at UW. But a lot of my issue and what I'm rooted in is this historical disposition of not knowing how to reconcile emotions. If you just think about historically, when we think about the slavery, the way we've treated women, the educational system, you keep going back, the policies, there's literally some root of emotional discontent that hasn't happened. You know, I won't go back too far, but if you think about 1865, when we stopped slavery, the same year, the KKK was established. Not because of white power, it was really because people feeling like they're losing something, trying to find ways to protect what's theirs. And that's kind of a thing that I had to kind of think about that notion. So when I started thinking about my place of like being a black man in the United States, I started thinking about my experiences. And I'm not talking about my experiences of just racism and being called a nigger. I'm not just saying that. I'm talking about me thinking about the reaction and the why behind that. When you think about investigating the why behind yourself, it's your eating habits, meditation, all these practices kind of coincide with helping you strip these layers away to really understand kind of what is the root of why you're having such a response or where is that hurt lying in. And that's where I feel like institutionally, community, individually, collectively, we inherently struggle because we have a system that takes advantage of the inconveniences of looking at yourself. So with me, when I think about that notion of self-investigation, I had to think about my place. How did I think about my position of power and privilege? How did I think about where I was going? Everything that was happening in terms of who I was, me, I had to think about my emotions, reactions. When I thought about when I was first called a nigga, now we think about the word nigga and what it means, the connotations and whatnot. But when I thought about the first time I was called a nigga, I was 7 years old. And I was surrounded by Hispanics and I was surrounded by white folk. And I was the one that was called a nigga. When I started getting into my meditation and started investigating my emotional responses, I started realizing it wasn't the word nigga that actually got me upset or even made me have an emotional reaction. What it was the fact that I was the one that didn't look like nobody else, and I was the individual one being called out. The way I looked, I was the only one. I felt like an outsider. And so when I think about the notion of being called a nigga and the fact that at the time I was being called a nigga, it made me feel like an outsider. That's a different thing. That's a human experience. That's not pertaining to no black person or white person. So I had to think about it. Oh, when the word nigga is said to me as a black man in this country, it's helped me understand that I'm an outsider. That's really what that meant and how it was used institutionally, just to help you understand that you didn't belong. And so when I started getting rid of that notion of that, the outsider, their emotional reaction, I was an outsider, understanding that root, that word didn't have no power no more. But still, when you think about walking into a room being called a nigga, it's not easy. But it's you having to understand and take individual accountability for what emotional reaction you're having to the context of the situation. And that's what's so hard, because we've been told how to react. When you hear the word nigger, people say, don't say it unless you black. Or if you white, you can't say it. Really, it's not. That has nothing to do with it. It's this human experience that has been happening. What happens to a people that have been persecuted and not able to use their voice? Because in a democratic system, everybody has to have a voice at the table. That's just a fact. If you want a collective to move forward, everybody has to have a voice, and everybody has to have a chance to tell their story. Now, when nobody doesn't agree on the story, where is that practice? And that's when we have to think about our own country's disposition, historical disposition. What practice of reconciliation do we have? And if we think about that, we are a perpetuation of that. When you look at the historically white institutions, when I was working at UW or UW Bothell or WSU Vancouver, these historically white institutions that struggle with educating and supporting the populations of color or diverse populations, look at the history. Where have they reconciled with themselves? Straight up. And not that we're pointing out that, but I recognize that in myself. As I start recognizing my position as a man of my size, of 6'3.5", 255 pounds, playing linebacker at a Division I institution, I was placed at the top tier. How do I deal with that position, coming from nothing, having something, and being in a position of power? How am I thinking about utilizing that? So for me, it was this investigation of individual accountability. How do I think about my position in power and privilege, and how do I use that? And when we think about it, we're not taught, especially as a black man coming from the projects, how we're supposed to utilize our position of power. What we know is get money, don't beat on women, making sure you fucking them right, and then we move on. A very surface level and shallow understanding of levels of intimacy, ideas of self, love, all these notions. And then we're sent into these institutional frameworks that milk us for cash and then expect us to understand how to negotiate these very complex ideas of learning, self-acknowledgement. I remember the very difficult time that I had when, as a young college athlete, going to Africa and realizing how selfish I was. And I think that's a big part of our disposition as a people. We have a hard time seeing these mirrors. And when we get through the race, the gender, it's really not even about that. Those are layers that we must go through because that's what we participated in. We created that chaos. When we think about our history and when we made race an issue because we had a hard time distinguishing what religious affiliation people had, so we had to think about color. And I mean, back in the day in the history, you could read it for yourself. That then we have to take responsibility for. So when we say Black Power, yeah, I get it. But it's really like, at the end, what are you saying is being powerful? The fact that the way I look, what I celebrate, how I celebrate is dope. Because I've been told that it wasn't. No, that's right. But when we think about the very brass tacks of it, that's what happened when the people are oppressed. That's why hip hop, at its essence, in its history and at its core, speaks across the world. Because it speaks about those that don't have a voice, period. Black folks just had a dope ass way of presenting it. And that's why Cornel West, when he talks about him being an inherent blues man, is because blues inherently does with the conflict of the funk, of human nature. And that's the evolution of hip hop. So when you think about that notion of reclaiming your power, it starts with you. And that's what's hard about the United States narrative when we think about the color lines, the police off brutality, the womenism, I mean, all of it. All of it is a result of us not taking accountability of how we've been contributing to the chaos. UW, you look at the history of the University of Washington in terms of the Black Student Union. It was the Black Student Union doing a sit-in at the president's office. It wasn't the president's office saying, why are people of color feeling this way on this campus? And then what was the response? Give them some money and facility. So when we think about the notion of, or for me, as I've been thinking about the notion of my responsibility in this work, how do I change the world and be a part of this service to others? It came to self-love. If I'm not at my best self, how am I expected to serve others? Because we live in a system that says contrary, that we have to sacrifice. And so when I think about my position and how I took individual accountability for my position and what I'm doing, I had to really think about self-love as the notion of how it informed my work. So when you think about self-love, I'm not talking about like buying yourself shit and like, making sure I get my time. I'm talking about like investigating the tools that help you eradicate the fucking emotional dispositions you have inside. That's what I mean. Issues with your father, mom, family, relationships, sexuality, whatever it is. And so what did that mean? I had to relinquish all of that and see what was important to me. And that's tough. So again, when we see the tools that I developed, the yoga, the eating, the breathing habits, all of those coincided with helping managing the stress of the fatigue, the fear, the shame of learning how to love myself again. But when committing to that, what you start understanding is as you start speaking to yourself, learning to love yourself, and learning to understand that love language and communicate that to yourself eternally, now that way you communicate to the world becomes a little bit more clear. How you communicate your love language to the world is a direct correlation to how you learn to communicate to your own self. You learning how to love yourself and learn how to communicate to yourself what your love language is, that's what's gonna help you learn how to articulate your love language to those in your life. And that's something for me having to learn to love. Because the women I was with, the women that I hurt, when I hurt other women and when I had to understand, every time I accounted for all those relationships that I hurt, all those relationships that I manipulated, all those times I lied, all the times I hurt, every time I deceived, I had to realize as I was lying to them, I was just literally lying to myself and hurting myself. So I had to think about all those relationships. And as I took all that time to reconcile with those women and reconcile in those relationships that I hurt, or those people that I traveled in the different worlds that I wronged or lied to, did I take that same effort to understand and to forgive and to reconcile with myself? And that's that part that I think we really struggle with, is understanding that we are priority if we want to be our best. If you don't learn to be unconditionally in love with yourself, and I'm not talking about like ego love. I'm talking about how are you learning to eradicate those things that are causing reactions and stopping you from being your best self, because those are the things that allow you to see your purpose. A lot of people are confused and shrouded in this notion of how do I find what I need to do? Or think about why are you struggling? Get to that why with yourself. I had to think about why was football important to me? Because I wanted to get attention from my father and buy things for my mom. And I didn't love going out there knocking people out on the football field. I had the talent for it. I really didn't have shit else going on, so that's what kind of kept me going. But I had to peel that layer back. And when you peel that layer back and realize, holy shit, that wasn't what I really wanted to do, you got to take accountability for that. And that's the hard part. Relationships, same thing. So a big part of when I thought about this notion of race, identity, conflict, it was hard because when I went back to Africa and I started seeing people that looked like me, but I was placed in this compartment being colored, and then I had black folks that looked like my aunties and uncles, but they weren't accepting me. I had to really understand, why was I so reacted to it? Why did that hurt? Because I wasn't accepted. Because I was told in the hood, when you get back to Africa, that's like the homeland. Like, these are these notions that I made up of myself. So I had to understand. Then I start going to Taiwan. Then I start going to Nepal. Then I go to Egypt. Then I go to all these different places in the world, Panama. And what I'm starting to see, these same trends of like human experience and struggle and the reactions to people in power and not working with the people. I mean, like, I'm seeing these human experiences perpetuate themselves. Spirituality, religion, it's literally the manifestations of people's spiritual experiences. But you see the principles of power and privilege. how that sways and warps into something else, because I've been seeing with myself how difficult it is to keep my emotions in check and like be accountable for my actions. Like, and I've been placed on the top tier. Division I athlete, light skin, got the swag, the tattoo. I mean, the things that the society has informed me that are actually prevalent. Not the things that I've said to myself. I'm saying the things that people in the community have identified as high quality traits. My size, my alpha presence. These are the things that make me appealing as a male. Power and privilege. So when I think about, as I've been using those positions in power and privilege and taking responsibility for that, it's difficult for me, the top tier man that society has placed me at. So I can't imagine for the dude that's looking up to me, that doesn't even have the courage. So again, how am I, modeling my emotional discontent? That notion of not being able to show your emotions, we know for a fact now, internalized emotions can manifest sickness. So how do I, as a masculine male, show those that look at me and look up to me in some capacity, how I manage my emotional discontent? And we'll have other talks that we'll do next week around sexuality, relationships, a lot of things that we listed out. But when we think about race identity conflict, what we need to not get confused with is that Black power is not the solution. White power is not the solution. Individual accountability and soul searching is going to help you understand the joining layers. Because when you talk about the resistance that rose up in the Black community with the Black Panther movement, you can go right to Japan and look. You can go right to Taiwan. You can go right to Africa. You can go right to Nepal. You can go right to all these other places that have been oppressed in some capacity and how they have risen to shine the light. And that's a consistent basic principle. So again, having to take account for that. And so when I relinquish the religious beliefs, the kind of compartmental learning, thinking about how I learned and what was speaking to me, being honest to myself, because every time I went with the intuition of my spirit and was to myself, the more truth started revealing to myself. And then you start reading other information that starts coming to you, and then all of a sudden you start realizing you have so much knowledge and it's in you. So that's why you mindful of what food you put in yourself, what people you surround yourself, what institutional framework you allow you to be in. And that's hard because we say money, we say family, we gotta have a white picket fence and all these different notions of self, but what we really have forgotten is to ask yourself, what is it that I truly like and love? And to know, being honest to that notion in yourself will bring you to what you need to do, but it's inconvenient though, because that means you might have to reevaluate the money, how you're spending your time, the people you're spending your time with, and that's fear, shame. I mean, there's all type of emotional discourse. And so for me, the individual accountability has been really hard. Losing relationships, my own father. I mean, our relationship in terms of me saying, you can't be in my life unless you're absolutely honest with me, has forced my father to say, I can't be in your life no more. And it doesn't matter how dope I am, no matter how dope the work I did, the website, the documentary. The fact is that my father can't be honest with me, and that forced him to walk out of my life. I gotta eat that. So how do I, as a male that's talking to other males and people, model not having that frame? And that's hard because I don't have the reference of the father, you know what I'm saying, in that relationship. So how do I deal with that? Meditation, the food I eat, the yoga, and the yoga helps me create capacity. So I'm creating oxygen, keeping the blood circulation. So the stress and the fucking, emotional discourse that I'm having from that conversation doesn't fucking drive me crazy. Because the work is hard. And I think we've had this fine line that's blurred where we've had this notion of success being us sacrificing ourselves to do good for the other, and that's not it actually. It's actually, how do you learn to love yourself unconditionally to then be that for the others? Because we keep trying to ask everybody else, how do you love and how you do this? It's all within ourselves, but we have to have space to do that. So like when you think about your job, what space in your job do you have to be vulnerable? Just okay. How about learning institutions? What learning institutions have space to let people say the wrong things around race, gender, identity? to say things that they don't know and then learn to say them right. What learning institution has the leaders, the presidents, the leadership really modeling exactly the expectation of what they're expecting their subordinates to do. I mean, very three basic principles I listed where you struggle with. And I had to think about that because I was director of a department, diversity access, recruitment, and I understood the responsibility of the department, what I'm doing. But also I had to understand that this job, though it was good for me to do, it didn't allow me to be my best self. And that's scary because I had a budget, I had the support, I had the staff, I had love, I had it all to be at this job and do great, become president. But when I thought about the job, when I got up in the morning and the anxiety of just having to constantly deal with everybody's masks, I work off of genuineness, honesty, love. And when I'm not feeling that, I can't be my best self. So if I love myself and I'm not getting it here, I gotta remove myself. That may mean a little inconvenience. So when I thought about that job, it was great, but it didn't allow me to be my best self, period. And that's brass tacks, and it's hard. How are you allowing yourself to be your best self? That's the constant thing when you think about individual accountability. Now, the hard part is doing it by yourself. And so for me, surrounding the community, like right now, I have my wife, my partner, my best friend, and in tandem, we are equally working at trying to be our best selves and supporting each other. I got very lucky to have a partner with that. And that's why the next notion after individual accountability is community support. Because you have to get over this notion and ego that you're gonna be able to do it on your own, which is we're taught. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. We don't work that way. As the human species, we actually are at our best when we're working together, period. And you can debate me on it if you want. Because a relationship, you enter into a hall of mirrors. And when you're in a relationship, that other person that you choose to be with helps you see the angles that you cannot see. And as the longer you choose to stay in that relationship that is giving you the best tools to help you be your best self, they will help shape you to be your best. Straight up. But you have to understand your own love language first to articulate that, because they got to be able to give you that energy, support that energy when you're good, you're bad, when the sex is born, all that shit. And if that you find, whether it's with a person or with a community, there's where you start building. So when you think about individual accountability, how do you take account for your own actions in every capacity? How do you relinquish all the notions that have been forced to you and then really think about what's important to you, straight up? And then after you identify that, identifying those tools that help you manage that difficult walk. It fatigues you. It can. You got to be honest. Now, how do you put your ego to the side and understand that you can't do this on your own? How do you do that? And then you find a surrounding community that helps you do it. And that's the hard part, because then you start realizing family, friends, a lot of those folks that you thought were in your corner, when it comes to you really sharing with them what it means to be your best self, now you start realizing they actually can't provide you that support. Hence me losing my pops or friends or whatever. You get what I'm saying? So still loving yourself to say goodbye to those that cannot give you the love that you deserve. And how do you know the love that you deserve? By investigating yourself. What does love mean to me? What is it that I need? And being honest. And that's hard. So again, after individual accountability, how do you now surround yourself by like-minded individuals and commit to that? Because we do so much micro-compromising on so many levels. Oh, well, he doesn't give me that, but he gives me this. Or I could get that, but not that. We have to forget, you actually don't have to compromise. But that shit is inconvenient. Again, the trouble with internal revolution is the convenience of privilege. Period. I don't give a fuck how you chop it up. You can put it anywhere. If you want to be the best you, internally, investigate yourself to the depths. But the thing is, that's hard. At any point in time, you can say, fuck it, I don't want to. As a man, if I'm starting to really wrestle with my toxic masculinity and what I was raised with and how I'm trying to better understand how to support the feminine part of me and the rise of feminine leadership, how do I learn to deal with that? I had to investigate within myself. But if I wanted to, I could say, fuck it. And I can go to a space right now, pay for prostitute, whatever, that can feed whatever I want, if I want it to. That's the issue. We don't have enough modeling of that. How are we as men getting better with the feminine energy and balancing ourselves out? Because we know that is literally the part that's helping us become better and healing us. And so again, for me, it's been having to surround myself and being very honest. And every time I'm honest about what I need, and every time I'm honest about, and when I'm practicing with love and compassion, that's showing love and affection to myself. So if I don't have a lot of people surrounding me, that's okay, because I love me enough to be with me. And for those that do love me enough to share that space with me, it's because you're sharing the space with me. And I look at your love and how you love you, and I definitely would like to be around how you love yourself. That's just a practice. Love. And that's a vibration, being honest. So every time you choose to be ground-shakingly honest with yourself, you are practicing literally a vibrational frequency. And when you see other people being honest, you're gonna feel that vibrational frequency. It's the same thing, just like with negative attitude, but positive attitude. And so for me, it's been about individual accountability and then surrounding myself by like-minded individuals thinking about kind of the same notion of like self-investigation and how do I continue to find ways to share with people my love language in love and compassion in multiple ways. Now, the third big thing is the institutional support, because we all have some type of job or a business, and that's our institutional support. And that's for me why I had to leave my job. I didn't have the institutional support to help me be my best self. So I had to quit. And that was scary. And so then that's the part though. The journey is when you choose to love yourself, sometimes you'll put yourself in some scary predicaments. So how do you manage the fear of failure or like being broke or whatever? That's meditation, the yoga, the eating. Because again, I had to be at my best self to better receive whatever was coming my way, putting my ego aside. And that's the part. Learning how to manage the ego, everything counts. What you're doing, what you're eating, the people you're around, what you're saying to yourself, how are you learning to love yourself again? Ashe, brother, I appreciate you. It's an everyday practice, and that's why, again, the yoga, the eating, the meditation, the breathing practice, it's not a Buddhist nothing. That's a human practice. When you go read the Sanskrits on the yoga practices and all the different variations, there's no names. It was all anonymous. And they'll tell you why. Because it was for the human race to help learn to manage the chaos of the world. And so that predates everything. When you talk about Jesus, all of them were learning yoga to help them manage the emotional discontent of being in the world. Period. That shit hasn't changed. We just have a lot of distractions. So when we think about peeling back those layers, that's what I'm saying. What has happened to me is that I had to literally start with myself. And that self-love and understanding my love language and how I articulate it to the world helped me understand how I could be my better self. And the more I surrounded myself around other folks that wanted to be their better selves, holy shit, all of a sudden the universe and energy and shit started perpetuating, and not coincidences, but manifestations of our love. That's what they talk about. And now that we're in this stage of awakening and consciousness and shifting, you know what I mean? It's just elevated even more. So for me, it's been keeping myself accountable every day, thinking about how I'm being my best self and being committed to loving myself unconditionally. And literally, that has helped me literally love others better. Because I see the struggle in myself with my ego, my pride, all of it. And when I see people that are in positions of power bound by those things, I can't get mad at them like I used to and judge them and be like, niggas is tripping, nuh-uh. Now it's like, not niggas no more, I'm like, brothers. Because now I can't, it's just, that's my heart. That's what compassion, thinking a different way to say it. But it's hard. And so again, when you think about individual accountability, you can't be naive and think you can do it on your own. You gotta be honest about what tools are helping me be my best self in every fucking thing. The sex that you're having, the people you're talking to, the food that you're drinking, how you fucking close your wallet, everything matters. And that's inconvenient and that's stressful, because to see that truth, what is around you that is so eager to keep you fucking bounded, it can be overwhelming. So, in the last one, institutional, like I said, when I left, the whole notion of why I left was to take a chance on myself to try to build with others and building my own institutional framework. So now, again, we're thinking about these three notions of how I've developed these tools. I'm at these points now where I'm looking at my position in race. Not that I won't see race, I see myself as a black man, but I understand why we have to talk about the race question now. And it's not because of black pride, white pride, or anything. It's because these are the layers in which we constructed. So when we think about the gender issues and the racism and all the shit that's right now prevalent, these are the layers in which we created. Once we have a chance to get through those layers, we're gonna understand it's this human experience that we gotta really work with. How do we become better humans with each other? And that's what I've recognized in myself. At the end, after I've got through my black power and I've had a chance to get my knowledge and I understand self-love and I know that I'm dope and I don't have to impress and I don't have no obligation to nothing but to love myself and be my best self for those to serve. Once I understood that, it was constantly human experience. How I'm connected with other human beings. Recognize, I don't have to even speak your language, but I can see your emotion. I can feel your vibration. And that what was prevalent with the individual accountability. And then when I see the collective, you can see a community that has love and support for each other, and you can see a community that doesn't. Because again, it's a vibrational frequency. And I realized when I visited those communities of love, I liked what that was. And that helped me be at peace. That helped me, and I was committed to that. So now I'm committed to trying to build communities of love. How do I use my skills so that I've developed all my years of education and workshopping and facilitating and program development and policy writing, whatever it is, and publishing? All that skill set now is I want to use to help build communities of love. Because at the end, my institutional framework has to have that foundation. I believe if the institution and your intentions are right, the success is inherent. It's inherent. And that's just been the result of my work. Every time I've worked into a community and had to build bridges between the Native American community or the Latin community or the black community or the white community or the poor community between the rich community, it's been about relationships and the honesty within ourselves. And every time I've modeled the difficulties of with me and how I'm struggling with it and how it's a collective thing, our intentions being true, the work has always thrived. Always. Always. And so it's hard though, because that principle is not perpetuated, because you can't quantify it. Unconditional love as a practice in developing a business framework. You know what I mean? So that's why, again, I have to try to model that. And so a lot of the work and the next talks that you'll see from us are going to be around these institutional frameworks that we're going to be trying to rethink and build on our own. The workshops that we'll be offering, the trips around the world, the talks are going to be about the tools and what we've developed. So that's going to be my time, folks. I really appreciate whoever chimed in today. If there's any questions or anything that you have, feel free to message me or send me things. I love it, y'all. Thank you so much, Ashe, and God bless you and live in love and happiness. Peace.